There's a specific kind of historical vertigo you get when you try to overlay an ancient map on a modern one.
Right.
Usually nothing really lines up. The borders are gone. The names are unrecognizable. Whole nations have just vanished.
But sometimes the landscape remembers, even when the
There's a specific kind of historical vertigo you get when you try to overlay an ancient map on a modern one.
Right.
Usually nothing really lines up. The borders are gone. The names are unrecognizable. Whole nations have just vanished.
But sometimes the landscape remembers, even when the politics don't. That's the stubbornness of geography.
Exactly. And that's what we're looking at today. We are doing a deep dive into a place that, honestly, it sounds like it belongs in a Tolkien novel.
Arachosia.
Arachosia. It had that mythical ring to it, the satrapy of Arachosia.
It really does.
But the source materials is crystal clear. This is not a myth. This was a pivotal strategic engine of the ancient world, a place where empires collided. And our mission today is to prove a very specific, and I think a very surprising point.
Which is?
That Arachosia is the proto-Pashtoon heartland. That the people living there 3,000 years ago are, in fact, the direct ancestors of the Pashtun nation we know today.
That's the core thesis, yeah. And it's a powerful one because it reframes how we see the whole region. You're not just looking at ruins, you're looking at the origin story of a major ethnic group in Central and South Asia.
Okay, so let's orient ourselves. If I'm looking at a map of the Persian Empire, say around 300 BCE, and I toggle to a modern satellite view, where am I looking?
You're zooming right in on the borderlands, southern Afghanistan and western Pakistan.
Okay.
Specifically, you want to find the basin of the Arghandab River.
The Arghandab.
Right. So think of Kandahar in Afghanistan as your western anchor. Then just follow that river and the mountain passes eastward, right across the modern border into Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in northern Balochistan. That whole geographical footprint is almost identical to ancient Arachosia.
And here's the aha moment that just hooks you right at the start. The ancient Greeks, who are, obsessive about cataloging every tribe they met.
Absolutely obsessive.
They had a name for the people in this region. They called them the Paktyans.
Or Paktyans, yeah, depending on the translation.
And that jump, linguistically, from Paktyan to Pashtun, that's not a big leap, is it?
It's a very short hop. It's what linguists call a regular sound change. I mean, most scholars now agree that Paktyan, or even Paktas in the older Vedic texts, is the direct ancestor of the word Pashtun.
So when Herodotus is writing about the Paktyans in the 5th century BCE, describing their clothes and customs,
he's effectively giving us the first field report on the ancestors of the people living in Kandahar and Peshawar today.
that just reframes everything. We're not talking about some lost civilization. We're talking about continuity, deep roots. But to get how they survived there for 2,500 years, I mean, that is a long time to hold on to real estate in that part of the world.
It is.
We have to understand the land itself.
Geography is destiny, especially there.
Let's start with the name, Arachosia. It sounds Greek.
It's a Hellenization. The Greeks just couldn't pronounce the local name, so they adapted it. The indigenous name, from old Persian inscriptions, was Haravatisha.
Haravatia.
Which translates pretty literally to rich in waters.
See, I flagged this in the notes because it stopped me in my tracks. When I think of southern Afghanistan, rich in waters is not the phrase that comes to mind.
No, you think arid, rugged, dusty.
Exactly.
And that's our modern bias. We see it through the lens of conflict footage. But the Arghandab River system, historically, is this massive, thriving oasis. It's the lifeblood of that entire plateau.
The sources even call it a breadbasket.
It absolutely was. You have to picture this complex network of irrigation, of canals that allowed for huge sedentary agriculture. And the first rule of civilization is simple.
Yeah.
Where you have a food surplus, you get cities.
And you get them early.
Very early.
This is where the deep time part of the research just blew my mind. We're not starting the clock with the Persians, we're going way back to the Bronze Age. The research highlights a site called Mundagak.
Mundagak is essential to this whole argument. I mean, if you visit the site today, it looks like a series of dirt mounds, but in its prime, around 2600 BCE, this was a metropolis.
2600 BCE. So you're talking about a civilization that existed at the same time as the Great Pyramids of Giza.
Exactly. And Mundagak wasn't some backwater village. It was a proper proto-urban center. It had massive defensive walls, a palace with colonnades, evidence of long-distance trade with the Indus Valley, even Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
It was part of what we call the Helman civilization.
The Helman civilization. I mean, that's a term that implies a level of sophistication we just don't hear about in the popular history of Afghanistan. It's always a crossroads or a buffer zone.
And that's the great tragedy of how we tell this story. We treat it as the space between the important places. You know, Alexander marched through here.
Right.
But the archaeology of Mundagak proves that this region, Arachosia, was a center of gravity in its own right. It was a destination.
And that centrality creates what the text calls urban continuity.
Right. If you look at a map, ancient Arachotis and Alexandria Arachosia, which is modern Kandahar, are practically neighbors. They sit in the exact same fertile pocket.
It's the logic of the terrain again. If you want to control the trade routes and feed an army, you build your city right there. It's the only place that makes sense.
Precisely. Empires rise and fall, names change from Harvachia to Arachosia to Kandahar, but the city stays because the water is there. So when the Persians show up around 500 BCE, they're not walking into a vacuum. They're annexing a place with thousands of years of settled history.
Okay, so we've got the stage set. A fertile, fortified valley with Bronze Age roots. Now, enter the empire, the Achaemenids.
The First Persian Empire. This is where Arachosia really enters the written historical record as a distinct political unit.
As a satrapy.
A satrapy is just a province, basically, run by a satrap, a governor. And Arachosia was a vital one. It guarded the eastern frontier. If you controlled Arachosia, you controlled the gateway to India.
But let's get back to the people. We mentioned the Paktyans. The notes bring up a specific piece of evidence that I love. The Behistun Inscription. This is one of those huge carvings on a cliff face in Iran, right?
Yes, on Mount Behistun. Commissioned by Darius the Great around 520 BCE. It's basically his victory lap listing all the rebellions he crushed.
It's propaganda in stone.
Pure propaganda. But Arachosia shows up in a really interesting way. They aren't the villains.
They're the heroes of the story, almost.
Exactly. The inscription talks about a massive rebellion across the empire. But the satrap of Arachosia, a man named Vivana, stayed loyal to Darius. And he and the Arachosians fought and defeated the rebels who were trying to take the province.
Okay, so why is that so significant? It sounds like one governor doing his job.
Because it implies political coherence. If the Paktyans were just scattered, disorganized tribes, they couldn't have mobilized an army to defend the province. The fact that Vivana could raise a force and win battles suggests the society was organized.
He had agency.
Huge agency. They were active stakeholders in the Achaemenid system. Not just passive subjects, but participants. The inscription validates them as a real power block.
And they held on to that power, even as the world was turning upside down. Because after the Persians, we get the big one, Alexander the Great.
The Macedonians roll through in the 330s BCE. Alexander founds his city, Alexandria, Arachosia, Kandahar, and then he moves on.
And then it's just chaos. The Seleucids, the Mauryans from India, the Greco-Bactrians, a revolving door of empires.
Which leads to this idea in the research that I found just fascinating, the concept of White India.
Yes, Indica Luki.
This comes from Isidore of Charax, a geographer from the 1st century. White India. It sounds like a total paradox. What was he describing?
He was describing the liminal nature of Arachosia. Liminal meaning it's a threshold. Geographically, it's on the Iranian plateau.
Yeah.
Culturally, though, by the 1st century, it was facing India.
It's where the tectonic plates of culture just smash into each other.
That's a great way to put it. By Isidore's time, the region had been influenced by the Mauryan Empire from India and then the Kushans. The white part of the name probably refers to the lighter-skinned Iranian or Scythian populations living there, but the culture was becoming heavily Indianized. A true melting pot.
A very specific kind. Not fully Iranian, not fully Indian. It was this vibrant, syncretic mix where you'd have a ruler with a Greek name worshipping an Iranian god, but following Buddhist moral laws.
And the evidence for this is just staggering. We have to talk about the Ashoka edicts they found in Kandahar. That feels like the smoking gun.
It really is.
So Ashoka the Great, the Mauryan emperor, is famous for leaving these rock inscriptions all over his empire, preaching Buddhist morality. But the ones in Kandahar are totally unique.
They're bilingual, and the languages he chose tell you everything you need to know about who was living there.
One is Greek.
Which makes sense. Alexander had been there a century earlier, left a bunch of veterans behind.
And the other one is Aramaic.
Aramaic, the administrative language of the old Persian Empire.
I mean, just pause and think about the sophistication of that. You have an Indian emperor preaching Buddhist Dharma, but he translates it into the language of Greek philosophy and the language of Persian bureaucracy.
And think about who he's translating it for. An inscription is useless if no one can read it. This proves the local population, the Arachosians, the ancestors of the Pashtuns, were cosmopolitan. They could navigate all these different cultural codes.
They were engaging in some seriously high-level intellectual exchange.
They had to be. They were absorbing Zoroastrian ideas from the West, Hellenistic philosophy from the settlers, Buddhist traditions from the East. It was a cultural smoothie.
But that brings up the really tough question, doesn't it? You have this population living in white India, bombarded by these huge external cultures. Greek art is beautiful, Indian philosophy is profound. Why didn't they just dissolve?
That is the million-dollar question. Why didn't they just become Greeks or Indians?
Right. Usually when a smaller culture meets a juggernaut like Hellenism, it gets absorbed.
But the source material suggests something else happened. It calls it selective and strategic identity maintenance.
Strategic identity maintenance. That sounds like a modern corporate branding strategy.
In a way, it fits. It suggests that while the Arachosians adapted externally, they learned the languages, they used the coins, they kept a very hard, impenetrable internal core. They played the game, but they lived by their own local rules.
And this internal core, are we talking about the roots of Pashtunwali here?
The evidence points very strongly in that direction, yeah. Pashtunwali is the traditional social and ethical code of the Pashtuns. It's famous for being incredibly rigid, ancient, and completely independent of any state law.
The text breaks down a few specific ideas that likely go back to this era: Malmastia, Nanawatai, and Badal. Let's unpack these not just as words, but as survival tools.
That's exactly how to see them. Take Malmastia, hospitality.
But it's not just, offering someone a cup of tea.
No, it's aggressive hospitality, a sacred duty to protect a guest, even a stranger, even an enemy who comes in peace. In a volatile place like Arachosia, with armies constantly passing through, this establishes a rule of engagement.
It turns a threat into a protected guest. It regulates the chaos.
Precisely. It creates safety. Then you have Nanawatai, asylum, the absolute right to seek refuge.
For anyone.
Anyone. If someone enters your home and claims Nanawatai, you are honor-bound to defend them with your life. In a land where the central government keeps changing, you need a mechanism to stop blood feuds from wiping everyone out. Asylum is a pressure valve.
And finally, there's Badal, justice, or, well, revenge.
The balancing of the scales. If you harm me, my honor demands that I harm you back. It sounds violent, but in a stateless society, it's a deterrent. If you know that attacking me guarantees a multi-generational feud with my entire tribe, you think twice.
So the argument is that these codes didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They evolved because of the environment.
Yes. Living in a contested borderland, a highway for empires, required a specific social operating system. You couldn't rely on the state to protect you because the state might be Persian today and Greek tomorrow.
So you become the state.
You create a stateless state, a system of honor and law that exists within the tribe, totally independent of who's sitting on the throne in the city.
That is such a powerful insight. Pashtunwali wasn't just tradition. It was an evolutionary adaptation to being constantly invaded. It was a shield.
And it worked. That's the key. It worked so well that while the Greeks vanished and the Mauryans retreated, the Paktyans, the Pashtuns, stayed. Their code kept them cohesive when everything else was falling apart.
And they stayed in the exact same spot.
The demographic consistency is undeniable. If you look at a map of Pashtun tribes today, they occupy the same fertile valleys and mountain passes that defined ancient Arachosia. It's almost a one-to-one overlay.
Which suggests this isn't population replacement, it's extreme resilience. The descendants of the people who built Mundagak, who fought for Darius, who read Ashoka's edicts, they are still farming the Arghandab Valley.
Cultural and ethnic continuity, the people stayed.
It really challenges how we're taught history. We always follow the great men. We follow Alexander's line on the map. We treat a place like Arachosia as just a stage where important people fought their battles.
It's just background scenery. We focus on the chess players, not the board itself.
But this deep dive, it flips the camera. It suggests the background scenery was the main character all along. The empire was the temporary thing. The people were the constant.
And that's so rare in history. To sit on one of the busiest, most dangerous intersections of the ancient world and maintain an unbroken thread of language, law, and identity for over 2 millennia. That is an incredible feat of human resilience.
It puts the modern situation into such a different light. When we look at that region today, we're not seeing a failed state or some modern invention. We're looking at a society that has outlasted nearly every empire that tried to conquer it.
Arachosia is still there. The land of rich waters is still there. You just have to know the ancient names to see it.
It leaves me wondering about the rest of the map. If Arachosia is hiding in plain sight as the Pashtun heartland, what other lost kingdoms are we staring at every day on the news, just disguised by modern borders?
The map is full of ghosts. You just have to dig deep enough to find them.
And that's exactly why we do these deep dives, to find the ghosts. Thanks for listening.
Until the next one.